All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Shannon Decker, and I am the Suicide Prevention Coordinator for the Truckee Tahoe Suicide Prevention Coalition. Starting this June, we will have a new coordinator who will be housed at Sierra Community House. We're very excited for her to join us. I will still be in the area working on suicide prevention and mental health efforts in conjunction with the coalition through another organization called the Speedy Foundation. But it's been a pleasure to serve the community, and I'm excited to see how we can continue to evolve. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and there's been a lot that's been going on throughout the community. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our blog. There's Dr. Amy Vale's website. At our blog at taholifeline.org/blog, we have a whole bunch of activities that have taken place for May's Mental Health Awareness Month. We had a proclamation from the Truckee mayor, various events and activities, a fundraiser at Alibi. We have recordings of different events and activities and links for things that are still coming up. We have a hike for hope benefiting the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention at Donner State Park on June 13th. We had a great mental health first aid training, and tomorrow I will be launching some additional training opportunities in June and July. So if you're interested in taking a mental health first aid, a youth mental health first aid, or a live QPR training, we'll have those launched tomorrow. And you can sign up for the newsletter or check back at our website. Under community, there's a section for training and events. You can check back there. We do have a recording of Dr. Vale's presentation from when she presented for the Community Collaborative on May 4th. You can click to watch it there. And following tonight, the recording for tonight will be linked right here for Mental Health in the Mountains. We do have QPR training, which stands for Question, Persuade, Refer. It's online, it's on demand, and anyone can take it. You're welcome to spread messages of hope and share resources like the California Warm Line by downloading this virtual Zoom background. And around town, you might have seen some of these Each Mind Matters, take what you need. At Truckee High School, one of the students took it and has been hanging those up around the high school. This was shared with me earlier today, and it really just brings joy. So as far as housekeeping goes, we will have time at the end of tonight's presentation for questions and dialogue. You're welcome to put questions in the chat box. And at the end of tonight's presentation, you're welcome to turn on your video and microphone. But for the presentation, it would probably be best to just to mute yourself and turn off your camera. Please remember that the content of tonight's presentation could be emotional for you, so take care of yourself. There's a lot of ways to reach out for help or to connect with someone. Behind me in my background, there's phone numbers for the California Warm Line, the Sierra Community House's helpline, the Suicide Prevention Hotline, and the Crisis Chat Line. And so it's always a good opportunity to take some time to get those numbers programmed into your phone. And we can stay on afterwards to chat with you. You're always welcome to reach out. So without further ado, I am happy to introduce Dr. Amy Vale. Dr. Vail is a licensed clinical psychologist and has been in private practice in the North Tahoe area since 2006. Dr. Vail's approach to therapy is based on a wellness model that supports the underlying healthy self while working to unravel faulty beliefs and behaviors that prevent adults, adolescents, and children from living their best lives. Dr. Vail has a collaborative approach to therapy and works closely with other doctors and healthcare professionals, along with parents, teachers, and others to support emotional growth and total well-being of all patients. She presented a phenomenal overview of COVID-19 and compassion fatigue for service providers earlier this month at the Community Collaborative meeting through the Community Foundation. Again, that recording is on our blog. You're welcome to click there and hear more. But I'm excited for you to learn more from Dr. Vail this evening, and I hand things back over to you.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Amy Vale, and it's my privilege to be here tonight talking with you. And I hope that you all learned something tonight that is helpful and that you'll be able to make use of this information in your lives or be able to share it with other people to help them with their lives. So as I get ready to start the presentation, I'm going to just check in quickly here with Shannon and make sure that the slideshow is working and make sure that what you're able to see is what I want you to be able to see. So Shannon, when you see it, does it show all the slides, or?
You're going to need to share your screen again.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, so going to sharing the screen. Oh, is it showing?
Not yet.
It's telling me that it is. No. Okay, to go to the Zoom link. Here we go. Okay, share. Does it show the whole thing?
It shows the whole thing. So
okay, so I'll play from the start. There we go.
That looks great.
How's that? Okay, great. So the reason for the presentation today is that so many people are struggling, and we all live in this community together. There are people all over the planet who are, I think, logged in. I have friends joining and colleagues that are watching from different places in the United States. And I had a few people who said that they were going to likely be watching in Australia. And the reason that there are people from around the world paying attention is because this is something that's affecting everybody on the planet right now, not just our small community. So I will be talking about this information really for our community, but it's global information. The compassion fatigue and burnout are things that affect everyone, but parents especially are impacted by COVID and the impact of the pandemic possibly more than other groups. And unless they're also first responders, they're having a really hard time. So the title of the presentation today is COVID Fatigue, Parental Burnout, and Mental Health. I'm going to be talking about 3 different sections, hopefully linking them all together in a way that's clear for you to understand, and then giving some solid examples and ideas of ways to implement the material in your lives, so your lives can hopefully be easier and people that you care about, their lives can also be easier. The first thing I'm going to start with a few definitions that I think will be helpful in understanding the reason how I use certain words. The first one has to do with sympathy. And in our world, well, especially in our community, there is so much, people are feeling really bad about what's happening with COVID. Parents are worried about their kids and the impact that COVID is having on them, on their social world. People are upset about the impact to the stores and to the retail world, to the sports. I mean, just there's so many different ways that people are feeling bad. So sympathy is a word that many people use, but when they combine, they often say sympathy, empathy, or compassion. And I think that people tend to mix up the three different words. So I'm going to explain. Sympathy is simply feeling bad for someone because something bad has happened to them. It doesn't mean that that has ever had to happen in your life to be able to recognize that they are having a bad experience. Whereas empathy is an action, it's an actual feeling that we have. It can have a visceral, like an actual physical sensation that is often connected to being aware of or sensitive to someone else's experiences or thoughts because you've also experienced something similar. You don't have to experience the exact same thing to be able to have an emotional reaction to something that has happened to somebody else. An example of that is if you have ever lost a pet, but you've got a dog or a cat that you've loved, but somebody that you know has lost a pet lizard and they are devastated. You don't have to have lost the same type of an animal or pet to be able to experience and recognize that they are having a really hard time because you will have gone through something similar. Where an empathy is actually a limited resource. People think that that it is unlimited, but it is a psychological response where when you have an emotional connection to somebody else, if you're not taking care of yourself, you will not be able to continuously give and give of yourself without replenishing yourself. And when people start to feel like they've run out of emotion to connect with other people, they feel really bad, and it can be incredibly distressing. Whereas compassion is the recognition of suffering that is coupled with the desire to do something to alleviate that suffering. It means to suffer together. Excuse me. And compassion is something that it would be nice if everybody had, but it doesn't seem like everyone does. But when people are compassionate people and they tend to want to help other people, most of the people who are helpers, most people who are first responders, teachers, anybody who is in a caretaking position tend to be very compassionate people. But compassion, there are limits to compassion as well, which when people run out of compassion, they ultimately feel the term is called compassion fatigue. And it is an incredibly distressing feeling, because especially for people who are used to caring about other people, because they just don't feel like themselves, and it can be really scary. Compassion fatigue is often found with the preoccupation of absorbing trauma and stress of other people, which can create a secondary feeling of stress in the person who is the helper. It can look an awful lot like PTSD. In the world post-COVID, most people are experiencing or acutely aware of the impact of the trauma of COVID on so many people. And they are having the experience of being overwhelmed, not just because of their own experience with COVID and the world as it has changed, but because they care about other people who are also experiencing the world now in the way it is after COVID has changed the landscape. And they are very, very overwhelmed. So when people have the feeling of compassion fatigue, which was something that in graduate school, my teachers discussed quite a bit, and there was an awful lot of language about making sure you take care of yourself as students and to be prepared for the future for when things got heavy, but they didn't really explain how you would know if you had compassion fatigue. They just talked about all the important reasons to be aware of compassion fatigue and the impact it could have on people. So I'll explain in a minute how you can tell if you have compassion fatigue. Let's see, it's shifting. The next slide. There we go. Secondary traumatic stress is an experience that people have when they have been hearing firsthand about the experiences of other people. The symptoms are very similar to post-traumatic stress and can look a lot like post-traumatic stress disorder. It is really difficult to go anywhere. A lot of people haven't really been going very many places because of COVID in the last year, but it is very difficult to go anywhere without hearing about somebody who has died, somebody who has lost a job, somebody whose children are having a really hard time because of COVID, people who are feeling suicidal, people who have suicided. There are so many sad and devastating and life-changing stories that people share, they want to share about their experience with COVID. And when you go out and you ask somebody, hey, how are you? And they unload about how horrible things are, even if you're just trying to make them feel better by saying, how are you? Or looking to connect in some way, it can lead to the feeling of wanting to shut down and not communicate, which is a painful feeling if you're used to asking people you really care about people, how are you? But you're just overwhelmed because of the negativity. And then there's burnout, which is a state of emotional and physical exhaustion, which is often caused by excessive and prolonged stress. Burnout is really often used in corporate America, that terminology, which is feeling overworked, feeling like your job doesn't matter, feeling like you don't have a purpose or that you're replaceable, which nobody likes the feeling of burnout. It tends to look like leaving work a little bit early, maybe not putting in as much effort, but it is typical. When people are burned out, they tend to think about wanting to get a different job. As a parent, people don't really have that option, but when they're feeling burned out because they're just emotionally exhausted because they're having a hard time and they're living with kids who are having a hard time, it can create an awful lot of trouble, which can lead to what are referred to as adverse childhood experiences or events, which I'll talk about more in a minute, which is something to be aware of how burnout can impact that. So
Amy,
burnout, yes.
Can I pause for just a second? I think something is hitting your microphone. It's making a large noise.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I will move my paper.
Awesome.
So
thank you.
burnout, yeah, thank you for telling me. Overwhelm, burnout, and compassion fatigue all look relatively similar in what the presenting symptoms are. So if you're experiencing any of these or know people who are, it's just important to pay attention to. Many people experience some of these things at different times in their life, and it doesn't have to be something that is really worrisome. But if you have many of them, it is important to pay attention to. They can look like insomnia, low libido, overeating, not paying attention to meals and skipping them, isolating, feeling depressed, anxious, being angry, irritable, not having motivation to do something, feeling like you're sleeping too much, feeling like you can't sleep, exhaustion. People can be fighting with their family members. They're angry, they're irritable. They can act in addictive ways. Which can look like substance use and abuse. It can also look like overworking. It can look like overusing technology. It can look like lack of self-care, like who cares, it doesn't matter, apathy, and a feeling of lack of hope. So if you are experiencing any of these, or you know people who are, it's important to pay attention that just because a few of these might come occasionally, sometimes people have a hard time sleeping. It was a full moon last night or the night before, so that often can throw people's sleep schedules off. But in general, if you're experiencing many of these things, pay attention, and if possible, get help. But one of the most important thing I think to help people recognize about compassion fatigue is what I refer to as Dgad syndrome, which is a way to recognize if you actually have compassion fatigue, which is an acronym for don't give a damn syndrome. People who are feeling like they don't give a damn anymore, they feel really far from who they were before, or the self that they are used to knowing in themselves. And it is incredibly distressing. And it can lead to a feeling of not being worthwhile, a feeling of not having anything to offer, and a feeling of many times people just feel really flat and unemotional. They just almost feel like they're dead inside. And when people start to feel like that, they often they don't have much energy for themselves, but they really don't have much energy to give to anybody else, which as a parent is incredibly difficult. And this was a quote that was used in the media quite a bit around George Floyd and the concept of indifference for how many people watched what happened to that poor man. But it's an important concept to pay attention to, that the opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. And when people feel like they don't give a damn, they're often feeling indifferent. They feel it's a really lonely and a very isolating feeling. So if you're feeling like this, or you know others who are, please be mindful, and hopefully I'll be able to give you some language to have conversations with people about it. But one of the ways that feeling can enter to people's lives is if they don't take care of themselves. Now, we all know how much people love their telephones and their technology, and it is very unlikely that people let their phones really run out of batteries. You see people running around panicking, can I use a charger? Anybody have a charger? It's because they don't want to let their phones run out of batteries. It is, people look at their phones like it's like I don't know, they love them, but people don't take care of themselves as much as they do often their technology. Self-care is a priority, it's not a luxury. And if we don't take care of ourselves and we don't encourage other people to take care of themselves, then people end up depleted and they don't have the strength or the stamina to move forward and to bounce back from stress, which is where this word resilience comes into play, which is it's a buzzword in society about building resilience and how important that is. But there are several things that go into resilience. It is actually almost like a muscle. We can work on it and strengthen it. It's not necessarily an innate gift, but it is a pattern. Resilience is based on a pattern of behaviors that we can learn and we can strengthen. It is the ability to overcome adverse events, and the ability to bounce back from stress. So in order to be resilient, it's important to be flexible, it's important to be healthy, and it's important to take care of yourself. Those are some of the most important things that lead to resilience and to the ability to bounce back. And that looks like taking care of yourself, which looks different for some people, but should generally include balanced and nutritious meals, regular exercise, routine schedules of sleep, a balance between work and leisure, honoring emotional needs and relationships, and then a spiritual connection with yourself that you are worth taking care of. And then whatever your higher power is, if you have a relationship with that, it's important to be connected to your mind, body, and your spirit. When people put the energy into the holistic triad, they are able to fill their own cup, and they are more likely to have the energy to withstand the next storm or difficult situations. Some of the ways to do this, people are really busy and often pride themselves on being really busy, but a great way to think about it is to pride yourself or to hold yourself accountable and actually schedule your self-care like you would your appointments. Set things for yourself to do daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly, and then stick with it. It's really easy to fall off the habit or out of habits, and it seems like it's harder to make healthier habits than it is to break negative habits. But by planning, it's a lot easier to make sure that you don't let these things slide, which then further leads to depletion. One of the ways that I like to think about it for myself is if I don't exercise for 2 days, that's okay, but it is not okay if I go 3 days without exercising. So that's one of the ways that I hold myself accountable, and don't give myself such a hard time if I skip a day or two. But if I skip 3, I can't. I have to take care of myself that way. Also, with having really clearly defined boundaries over yourself and your time, and prioritizing yourself and your self-care will help with having the energy to take care of yourself and then take care of others, which is having really clearly defined boundaries. Setting a time when you start working, setting a time when you finish working, setting clear times for bedtime, setting times for meals, challenging yourself to make time for friends, challenging yourself to make time for hobbies, for things that nourish you, that are enjoyable, not just keeping yourself busy and just being productive. It's one of the ways when people travel on the airplanes, they say, put yourself first. Even if the oxygen masks comes down, put it on yourself first before you help other people. It's a very similar concept, because the truth is, if we don't make the time by scheduling it, most people will not find the time to take care of themselves. One of the most important ways to think about this is on setting limits on being awake. I think this is a pretty funny picture, but sleep is something that many people skimp on, especially because of technology. They'll lay in bed with their phone, or they'll stay awake playing video games, or I don't know, almost doing anything other than sleeping. But it is so important this is one of the most important things that people can do to take care of themselves, which, there are lots of different reasons for it, but making sure that you set limits on how much time you're awake, and paying attention to the things that block you from actually getting enough sleep. This is a clear one. People tend to sleep with their phones. They love the phones. Adults struggle with it. It's really hard for teenagers and children to take a break from the technology as well. The technology is everywhere all the time, and parents are often busy doing other things, and the technology is a good way to distract their kids, keeps them out of their hair, but at the same time, it creates a whole nother loop. For many, many years, I've been presenting on the impact of technology on children and on adults too, but really on kids. And in so many ways, I feel like a hypocrite, because for so many years I was saying, get everybody off the technology, get them outside. And then COVID hit and the language shifted very quickly. And it was like, get everybody back inside and get everybody back on the technology. And even though you've been in school all day long, there are missing assignments, you better get them done. You got to get back on the computer. And the amount of just the whole language around technology has shifted, and it's very difficult to set limits. And this is one of the biggest challenges that with the parents that I speak to in my office talk about, is how to limit their children's technology use, because they often don't know how to do it, but they also don't want to have the fights that go along with putting the limits on. The children just lose their marbles when they are limited, and parents don't often, they're overwhelmed, they're overloaded, and they'd like to get along with their family and not fight. So kids end up acting like terrorists. They tend to get their way, and then parents end up feeling like they're not very effective, or they're just being railroaded and they don't know what to do. And then there's a really unpleasant power dynamic that shifts, and it doesn't go well for anybody. And it can lead to a lot of increased fears. Parents regularly tell me that they are worried, and especially in this last year, they say things like, whenever I tell them they have to put the phones away or get off the technology, kids many of them use it as leverage, and they get really aggressive. They can threaten, They make threats that parents are really worried about, that the only way that they can feel connected to their friends is by the phone. And if the parents take it away, then the kids threaten. And sometimes they're not just threatening, they're actually meaning it, but they say things like they're suicidal, or if their parents take the technology away, they're going to hurt themselves. Parents are often in a trap because they don't want them. Of course, they want their children to be safe, but they don't want them to get hurt. But they know that the technology is creating problems, but they don't know how to block it, and they get afraid, which leads to anger. And it's a big mess. And it's something that almost every parent who brings their children to me to talk to their kids, or are worried about their family members, it's because of the amount of technology time and how difficult it is to get them off of the technology and what happens when they put limits. So this concept right here, please don't feed the fears, which I think is great. I mean, we live in an area where we're not supposed to feed the bears, and lots of people are encouraged to regularly lock their cars and make sure that the food isn't there so we don't get the bears in the cars or in the houses. But fears are something that when people aren't aware about how they're thinking, their researchers have figured out, and I don't know how they figured this out, that the average number of negative thoughts people think a day is about 50,000 negative thoughts every day, which is a lot. So the question is, how do we block some of them? And some of the ways I think of it is the term of an ant, which is if you have an ant infestation, it's important to stop them before you get too many of them in the house. If you see one or two ants, okay, do something about it. But if you don't, before you know it, you're going to have a lot of ants. It's the same thing with automatic negative thoughts, which when we think about what our thought processes are on a daily basis, if you're leaning towards more negative thoughts, which many people do, there are some things you can do to slow that down. First is by being aware of what you're thinking. Second is by trying to replace the negative thoughts with something that isn't quite so negative. But also by limiting your exposure to negative information, and that looks like turning off the news, turning off social media, getting out of toxic relationships, focusing on what things you can control. And it seems like, I mean, especially with the media, if it bleeds, it leads. That was the way that the big news channels, that was one of the slogans for the news. It's really not quite like that anymore. People aren't watching the news, like sitting down watching CNN or CNBC or CNN like they used to be. Now most people get a lot of their information through the phone. And if you're not really careful, or with your children, if you're not aware of what they're consuming, it can be really dangerous. And kids are exposed to things that parents have no idea. I mean, you ask them what they're looking at, and most of them are like nothing, or they'll say something vague like, oh, Instagram or TikTok, but they're not explaining what they're following or what they're consuming. And it's really important to pay attention and try. I mean, I say try because kids are pretty resistant to often giving information and letting people know what they're paying attention, what they're watching. But if you have the conversation, or when parents are encouraged to set boundaries and have limits over it, at least from the very beginning, it creates a dynamic where they are more likely to have a relationship with their kids that they can talk about those things. But when people wait and they try to have those conversations once things have gotten difficult, it's really difficult. And it often leads to pretty explosive anger. Kids get mad, they feel like they're not being trusted, which makes it seem like they're not being trustworthy. But the anger iceberg, typically when people are angry, the feeling that is expressed looks like anger. But what's below that there can be all kinds of different feelings that are expressed or look like anger. And those feelings are sadness, disappointment, when people are hurt or insecure, if they're stressed, tired, overwhelmed, lonely, anxious, hungry, insecure, in pain, embarrassed. I mean, all those are different feelings that all can present and look like anger. So when those feelings are not addressed, and many people grow up and have grown up in families where conversations about feelings weren't really allowed, where their parents or caregivers didn't have a lot of language or have the ability to communicate about feelings very well. This is often what people would experience. And in our world today, this happens to lots of people. And this is a really clear example of an adverse childhood experience. Parents yelling at each other, the child hearing it and crying, and not knowing, I mean, this little one is so little, where's he going to go? Can't really get away from it. The childhood adverse experiences are, or adverse childhood experiences are called ACEs, are incredibly important to pay attention to, especially given the fact that we're living in the time of a pandemic, because the impact of these, lots of people have negative things happen in their lives, but when they have multiple negative things happen in their lives when they're growing up, the impact on their future health is significantly impacted, can be significantly impacted. So some of the adverse childhood experiences can look like living in a household with a depressed parent, experiencing emotional or sexual abuse, growing up in a family where there is substance abuse, physical and emotional neglect, having parents who divorce, living with caregivers or parents that have mental illness, having parents that are incarcerated, being homeless, having low socioeconomic status, being discriminated, growing up in a family without much opportunity, growing up with a lot of violence in their community, and having poor housing quality and affordability. Now, many people experience things in life that aren't positive, but it really gets complicated when multiple of these things stack up on top of themselves. So the question is how to counteract that, because those negative experiences, if not balanced, can lead to, and there's an awful lot of research that shows that heart disease, high blood pressure, stroke, and even diabetes are connected to, and shortened life expectancy are directly connected to how many adverse childhood experiences people have when they're younger, which is it's heartbreaking. But there are things that we can do, which is the optimistic side of things, which is to provide as many supportive childhood experiences as possible, which look like having children have stable caregiving situations, having families that are cohesive, having access to learning, having parents that, even if they're divorced, support each other, and the child feels that the parent cares about them and their well-being and their other parents' well-being, and having nurturing and nourishing relationships. And those are also, those do not have to be primarily in the house. There is a lot of research that shows that having two non-parental positive relationships with non-parenting adults when kids are younger has a significant impact on their level of health and happiness and ability to grow and withstand toxic stress and when they're growing up. So some positive childhood experiences also are growing up with the ability to communicate with family about their feelings, feeling that the family is supportive, participating in community traditions, enjoying the community, a feeling of belonging in school, a feeling of being supported by friends, at least two supportive non-parental adults, and feeling safe and protected at home and school, which all these things sound like the things we all hope every kid is going to experience. But in the last year and a half, last year really, with COVID and the shutdown, especially in our communities, most of the children were at home. They were not in school. They were not participating in community. They were not participating at school. They were not feeling supported, and they were often feeling really unsafe because of COVID, and then worried about if they did go to school, would they be safe? Were they safer at home? Were they going to get sick if they went to the supermarket? Did they have to wipe down all the boxes of cereal that they bought? And this overwhelming feeling of not being safe anywhere you go is definitely a negative, and something that I think, especially with the pandemic and paying attention to the fact that all the young kids, from like the babies and the young children who were impacted out of school during COVID, they are now transitioning to being teenagers. And the teenagers who experience the pandemic are going to be transitioning into being young adults. And the wave of mental health crisis that's coming it's been increasing for that age group for many years. But I think given all of the negative and adverse childhood experiences that many of them went through, we all need to be really aware of, especially of those age groups, because they're so vulnerable. stress is something that everybody experiences, and there are different types of stress. There is positive stress and negative stress. There is positive stress are things that just cause your body a little bit of an increase in heart rate, can help you focus. Positive stress increases, mild elevation of hormones, but that can be the feeling of getting ready to go participate in a sports game where they're nervous about participating, but it's positive because they're going to interact with community. Tolerable stress is, I don't know, it can look like things that, like when they're getting ready to study for finals, or they're having a harder time with relationships at school. They may be temporary, but if kids have healthy, positive relationships in their lives, they're likely to be able to maintain a solid mental health state and get through it. But then there is toxic stress, which is leads to the feeling of distress, which is intense and prolonged activation of stress response, buffered without positive buffering influences or relationships, which is basically what everybody has been going through with the pandemic. The level of intense and prolonged stress on everybody is huge, but it is incredibly important to be aware that there are a lot of kids out there who got the positive interactions and good experiences in their lives when they were not at home. And for the last year, they have been at home with parents and caregivers in situations that were not healthy, and they had no place to go. And now that the schools are reopening and kids are back in person in learning, it's really important to be exceptionally aware of the impact of the stress on those kids and how they may interact with the other students, and we need to just be really proactive about paying attention to that, which the CDC has come out with some new guidelines, which I do think are incredibly helpful. And I'm going to talk about those in a second, about how to recognize the impact and support the school communities, because the school systems and the administrations and the teachers and the counselors and everybody involved with the schools who are face to face with the children on a daily basis, they are going to need so much support from not just from the parents, but from the greater community as well, because they are the front lines and they are the ones who are really going to be doing the most intense work with the children, and they need our help just as much as the kids need the help too. So it's important to remember that with children, love is spelled with time, spelled Time. Kids feel loved when we spend time with them. More parents want to buy things for their kids and give them things, and that doesn't really work well in the long term with kids feeling valued. They have to just value the materialism and the things that they have, but the more time kids get with people who care about them, the better they are. But that does come down to age appropriateness. Little kids really need a lot of cozy time. I thought this was a really sweet picture of a parent or a caregiver asking the little one what's wrong. The little one's like, I don't know. And the caregiver says, do you want me to, do you want to come out? The little one's like, I don't know. He's like, I made you a nest. And then they're cuddling together and spending some time together being cozy, which with little kids, this is a little bit easier to build a fort and snuggle up. With teenagers, it's not quite as easy because they tend to just want to retreat. I thought this was pretty funny because this is what the semester and school year has been like for many kids. They're laying on the floor. They've got their technology there. They have a lot of things due. Their inbox is overloaded. Things are due at 11:59, and it just says they're absent and that the teacher posted a new assignment. But there's someone walking in the door with a cup in their hand, coming in to check in on them, which with teenagers, they may act like they don't want your attention, and they can yell and scream and make it seem like just leaving would be easier, but they really do need to be checked in on. They need to feel loved and connected. And they might not want to get in the fort with you, but they really do need a lot more attention than a lot of parents are giving them. A lot of parents don't even know what to say to their kids. They're really worried about their mental health, but they don't even know what to say. I get a lot of phone calls from parents who are they're panicking because their child has been, and many of them are panicking for really valid reasons, but many are panicking because their child was sad for 3 days and they don't know if that's a big problem, which it might be a big problem, but it's really important to give the language and help teach children, and many adults can use this, can would benefit from this type of education as well. But this is a mental health pain scale where thinking about the stress levels of what is mild, tolerable, or toxic, this level of emotional mental health pain is recognizing like the first three, 1, 2, and 3, everything is okay, but you're a little already frustrated or things might be bothering you, but you're coping. If it's a moderate level, number 4, today's a really bad day. You still have skills to get through it, but people can maybe get through it with self-care strategies. But if it starts to drop down past 5, 6, where mental health is starting to impact your everyday life, tasks are becoming harder to handle, it's a good time to check in with the doctor or with the counselor or with the school, or if it's for yourself, to reach out and get help. If you start getting down to the level 6, 7, or 8, there's really a problem. Number 6, can't do things the way you usually do them. You might feel impulsive or have compulsive thoughts, and it might be finding that you're having a harder time coping. If you're at level 7, which is the lowest of the severe levels, you're avoiding things that would make you distressed because you're afraid they'll make it worse. You should definitely get help. If it's 8, you can't hide your struggles anymore. You may have issues sleeping, eating, having fun, socializing. Your mental health is affecting almost all parts of your life. If it is a 9, you're at a critical point. You aren't functioning anymore. You need urgent help, and you might be a risk to yourself or others. And 10, it's the worst emotional and mental distress ever. I think that teenagers, especially today, they're not regulating. I'm seeing that on a regular basis. If something throws off their day, like they get in trouble from a parent, or they forget an assignment, or they have a fight with a friend, many are going from like 3 to 9 really fast, which is really scary. It's scary for them, but it's also really scary for their family and their friends, because their family and friends don't know if it's really a 9 or if they just don't have the coping skills to that really, if they were at a 4, but they're telling themselves that they're a 9. So I think that this type of language, which our school system and then in the Tahoe Truckee Unified School District does a great job with the social emotional learning. They spend a lot of time, energy, and effort communicating, which I'm hopeful that lots of other school districts will increase this type of coursework. And I think it's probably going to be mandatory curriculum in the not so distant future, especially with the amount of challenges that teenagers and children are having today. But this type of a scale of communicating on a daily basis can really help kind of put things into perspective to see how bad it is, or if it's not quite as bad, but people are thinking it's worse than it is. So when I thought this was a good one too, diet and health. Die mentality focuses on negative things. It's more on what's out of your control, things that people are doing temporarily, things that people don't like about themselves. It's really a negative mindset. Whereas a healthy mindset, things that you can control, and things to focus on are what you can control. Well, things that you can, focus on what you can control. Things focusing on what you do, what you say, and what you consume, which, it would be nice if people focused more on what they consumed and ate healthier, didn't consume as much junk on the internet, read better books, but they often don't, because the internet is so easy. So when leading to the concept of resilience, when we are healthier and we are taking better care of ourselves, we have the better ability to bounce back from stress. But when we're thinking about how to help children develop resilience and how to encourage children to have skills to strengthen their resilience ability, there are 7 C's, and that is one of the terms, the 7 C's that counteract early adverse childhood experiences. Those are confidence. instilling confidence for children, putting them in situations where they're going to be slightly stressed, which is a positive stress, but then they'll feel good about themselves afterwards when they have accomplished something. Then they get the feeling of competence because they actually did something and they hopefully did it well, maybe something that they were challenged by. They get a connection to people who are encouraging them to push their limits. They gain the sense that they've worked through something. It can build their character. When focused on the concept of contribution, it's what can you do to help other people who are struggling, which looks outside of you, takes the focus off of yourself and onto others. And the concept of coping skills, which can look like taking a time out, breathing, being creative, making music, reading, relaxing, hobbies. And then I'm learning to focus on the things that are in their control instead of focusing on things that are outside of their control, which often looks like blaming other people. So these 7 C's, when implemented regularly, can help with adverse childhood experiences and give children the ability to grow through what they're going through without crumbling. One of the, I thought this was such a beautiful quote here, that children do not need to learn how to handle separation. Instead, they need to learn to develop the ability to hold on when they are apart, which is the concept of attachment parenting and recognizing that relationships are really important. Often, especially with the way people can connect with technology and texting so easily today, I see it often where teens have these unreasonable, and they are unreasonable expectations of their family and their friends, that if they text them, they should get a response back immediately. And they don't have the ability to wait very long. They text during school, they text in the middle of the night, and when their friends don't respond, they can get incredibly agitated, and it leads to what can often look like some impulsive behaviors of repeatedly texting, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay?" And then they don't self-regulate or learn to calm themselves down because they're trying to connect to somebody else and have them help calm them down. So that concept of the ability to hold on when apart is a beautiful idea, and something that can really be the concept of resilience and helping children and young adults learn that they have more control over themselves. And it's important for them to learn how to self-regulate will do many of them a lot of good. This is the concept. What the CDC has this new model that's called the whole school, whole community, and whole child, which in the last year with COVID and so many people outside, so many kids not in the school system, especially in California, the impact on the children is massive. And the school system provides, when kids are in school, they get, if they have a toxic home environment, they are in hopefully a safer environment where they are offered opportunities to learn, to socialize, to be around adults who care for them, many of them to be fed. Sometimes it's the only meal that they get a day. And they have opportunities to be included and participate. So in the next year, especially with the transition back to in-person learning, this, as I said before, the schools are really going to need a lot of support. And it's important to remember that parents often hold the school district ultimately responsible for their children's everything, for the discipline, for parents don't want to recognize that they aren't parenting at home, and they want to put the responsibility for all of the kids' behavior, positive and negative, on the school. Actually, they want to take responsibility for the positive behaviors of their kids, but if their kids are behaving badly, often they look at the schools and they expect the schools to be the ones to handle that. I think that's really important in the upcoming future, of recognizing how can we all support the school? How can we support the teachers? How can we support the counseling staff? How can we support the administration? What can we as a community do to support the people who take care of the children the most every day? Because they really, like I said before, they're going to need so much extra support and positive reinforcement and acknowledgement of all the things they're doing well, because they hear a lot about what parents say the things they don't like, but the teachers and that they need to hear the positive because they're working really hard. So the my little section. So many people are terrified, parents are terrified about suicide and what happens when children don't handle their stressful situations and they hurt themselves or they threaten to hurt themselves. Nobody knows. It's really difficult to know how to handle situations like that, but every parent I know is worried. And especially given the pandemic and the negative experiences that so many people have gone through, the level of stress is really high and people are really vulnerable because they're afraid. And when people are afraid, they often express it with anger. Fear and anger are best friends. They tend to travel in packs and they're not pleasant. Neither of them are pleasant. But this is something that just one small thing that can be enormous that everybody can do to help other people, which is just to be kind and recognize that if people are having a bad day or if they yell at you or if they flip you off when you're driving or if they aren't very polite, just to recognize that we have no idea what is behind their actions and to be considerate and to do whatever we can to help others, to participate, to be aware and to be community focused, because a kind word can do more to help someone feel supported than almost anything. And if you don't know what to do, a kind word is a lovely thing to offer. And it's one of the things that what the little kids and teenagers really, they tend to just feel so filled up when they're given positive reinforcement or they're complimented or somebody notices something about them. And that's a way to connect with the feeling of empathy and recognizing that if they feel that way, then what can they do to share that positive feeling, which is by sharing the goodness wherever they can. And it often looks like giving respect. And I think this is the karmic wheel right here. What you give, what you get. Many teenagers today often talk about, well, I won't respect them if they don't respect me. So they don't behave in a respectful way because they're thinking that they deserve to be respected before they're going to give respect, which is a loop. Because if they're not treated with respect, then they don't give respect, which just reinforces that mess. So teaching respectful language, communicating with considerate tones, being polite, teaching manners and encouraging manners out in public is really important, but especially at home. People tend to treat their loved ones and their families and the people that they live with less respect than they treat the random person on the street. And some of that is, there's a saying, familiarity breeds contempt, but it's also when people are living together and they're stressed, they tend to discharge that stress with snarky comments, sarcasm, or the feelings of, contempt or being dismissive or not wanting to communicate, blocking out other people, which is really easy to do, by the way, with the phone. And there's a term for that. It's called phubbing. It's snubbing people and choosing your phone for it, which is a really unpleasant feeling. It's not respecting other people when they're wanting to communicate with you and basically just blocking them out, which feels like it is a form of neglect. And especially for kids, is incredibly painful. I do think that a good way to focus the energy at home and on manners is on having family rules and having a time where people actually get together. A meeting once a week is a great plan. It doesn't have to be for very long, but it's a set time that people then have something to look forward to. And they know that the things that they want to talk about can be focused on, which when people don't have family meetings and they don't ever have a set time to talk about things, they tend to discharge the information whenever they can, which can look like every time they happen to see somebody. With teenagers, if they don't sit down and have meetings and talk about what's going on, that can look like every time they walk in the door or before they leave, throwing out the like, oh, hey, this needs to get done, or this needs to get done, or hey, you didn't do that, or what about this? And it doesn't feel good. And it can lead to them not wanting to be around because they're being reminded of all the things that they're not doing. But if there is a time that is established, people can look forward to that and they can plan on it. And then they don't have to have those little comments all the time. I do think that family rules are incredibly important. And it's important that everybody in the house, at least all the adults, be on the same page. Because if one parent thinks that the telephones need to be put on the counter at 10 and the other parent doesn't think it's a big deal, the kids are going to play the parents off of each other, and they will manipulate, and then that will cause conflict in the family. And eventually the kid will probably end up with their phone, but the parents will be undermined and upset with each other, which then breeds frustration and irritability and is not good, because the kids then again, they have too much power, but they get what they want, and that reinforces a negative pattern. And it doesn't always go very far with teaching civility and healthy limits. So these are some parenting rules that I think are healthy and good ideas, which one is nutrition before junk. And that can look like, of course, eat healthy food before you consume candy or too many cookies. It can look like drink water before you have a soda. But it also matches up with nutrition before junk. Have you read a healthy book? Are you consuming information and the things that you're taking in balance with the junk? Or is it all TikTok videos? Is it all Minecraft? That would be all junk, or more junk than nutrition. So that's one way of paying attention to and just kind of self-checking what you're actually consuming. Having there be a balance between responsibility and play. There's a saying that all work and no play make Jack a dull boy, but all play and no work make him something worse. So I think that's a good one to think about in terms of the balance between responsibility and play. Often parents feel overwhelmed getting their kids to be helpful or do chores. So a parent will end up doing too many of the chores. The kid gets off without having to do much, but the parent ends up getting resentful and getting angry, and that can breed a very negative cycle as well. And that also happens quite a bit with parents. One parent tends to do more of the heavy lifting work, and the other tends to do more of the play and have the more fun with the kids. And that also tends to build resentment, and can often look like contempt when one person is feeling like they're the bad one and the other person is the good one, because the kids are going to want to choose to hang out with the one that is playful and doing the stuff with them, whereas the other one tends to be holding it together a bit more. So by recognizing where the boundaries are with that, and how much giving versus taking is happening, and also really focusing on the concept of respect, honesty, accountability, and encouraging kids to be agreeable and respect the vibe in the house. So when they're upset by something, they don't completely derail the entire family. There is an amazing book by a man. His last name was Forney, I think. It's 25 Rules of Civility. It is a great book, and incredibly helpful to helping teach manners and encourage good behavior at home, which hopefully will carry out into the world. But when people are stressed, they tend to regress and use lower level defense mechanisms, which can often look like temper tantrums or being really irritable and hostile. But if there is a family dynamic and conversations at home about what types of behaviors are expected at home, there becomes a framework for how to communicate and kind of what behaviors are expected at home, for how to basically have how to have a functioning society, which is incredibly important at home. I thought this was a fun one too, just in terms of like 7 rules for life, and of how to find balance for yourself in your life, which is to think less, feel more, frown less, smile more, talk less, listen more, judge less, accept more, watch less, do more, complain less, appreciate more, fear less, and love more, because we all definitely can use quite a bit more love. So if you're feeling that you're overwhelmed, and many people are, or you're experiencing burnout, take the time to recharge, take the time to give back to yourself, take the time to encourage your family members or your kids to have self-care as well, and set boundaries, because their version often for the young ones of self-care is just looking at their phones or going on Netflix and chilling. But that doesn't really reinforce and heal and nourish them on the inside. So I'm hopeful that you've learned some things tonight about how to prevent burnout, what it looks like, compassion fatigue, how to tell if you're experiencing it, and just the impact of adverse childhood experiences and how important it is to be to be aware of the children in our lives that are possibly struggling, and to be aware of the big wave of mental health issues that are coming. I mean, many of them are here right now, but I do think that they're going to be just bigger in the future, especially as the fallout of COVID, the landscape kind of shifts and kids go back into in-person everything. But that many of them are still going to be scared, and they're going to need a lot of reassurance. And a lot of adults are scared and are not so sure how to reassure the kids themselves. So taking the time to build your own reserves and hopefully focusing on strengthening your own concept of resilience will enable you to be a better parent or caregiver or friend, and to yourself and to others, and help the next generation and the littles who are around and on the planet now, help them weather this big COVID storm as gracefully as possible so they can be as healthy and functional in the future as possible, because there are a lot of them and we need them to be as healthy as possible. Thank you.
Amy, thank you so much. I really appreciate your expertise and just guidelines on how to kind of navigate and weather this storm, that all of the unknown. I totally understand if you guys need to drop off, but we do have a couple extra minutes here with Dr. Vail, and she's happy to answer any questions that you have. You're welcome to put them in the chat box, or at this time you can unmute yourself and turn on your camera to ask Dr. Vail.
Anybody have any questions, any comments, anything you want to know?
There was a question that came in the registration that asks, how do we help the sibling fighting and keep compassion when we're feeling burnt out as a parent?
Oof, that's a big one. I think that some of the rules of civility and having family rules about what's tolerable and what isn't will help, because if there aren't any rules, when kids and siblings tend to fight, I thought with my siblings, most people fight with their siblings, but it can go to the dark side really fast. I think that when there's a book that I love that's called 1, 2, 3 Magic. I think that is an incredibly helpful format for helping with timeouts. And when siblings are getting activated and getting aggressive, parents can just interact or intervene and try to stop it. But ideally, we want kids to grow up learning how to think for themselves and self-regulate. So the concept of the 1, 2, 3 Magic book is really effective in helping decrease some of that. But if the kids are getting really out of hand and they're aggressive and hurting each other, they've just got to be separated and kept apart until they can calm down. And then ideally having there be some type of restorative justice conversation of apology and, making amends to each other and then moving on. But that's a big one.
Thank you. I put some links to those 2 books, Choosing Civility, the 25 considerate conducts, and 1, 2, 3 Magic. Are there any other questions or comments?
Hi, Dr. Vail. This is Shelby Singer. I just want to thank you so much for this presentation. It was really helpful and so interesting. And I guess just a comment, I wanted to just kind of echo what you were saying about kind of the fallout from this, and just almost like we were living in such like high adrenaline and crisis mode for so long. And it seems as though, recently, since a lot of the restrictions have loosened, it's like we're now able to kind of like process more what has happened. And it's been really, I think, interesting for me to see with my own family and in my work, just how, I guess, behaviors and mental health has kind of like increased because, and I think it's like you were saying, just almost like this time to process after weathering this storm for so long and living in this crisis mode. So that was just was something I wanted to, I guess, comment on in my own observation.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting, the landscape is never going to be the same. Yeah.
Thank you, Shelby. All right, does anyone else have a question or a comment?
All right, well, if anybody does have any questions or comments in the future, please feel free to reach out to me. My office is in Olympic Valley. You can find me online. And I'm grateful to be able to be a resource in our community. I love living here, and I'm so glad to be able to be a part of this. Thank you so much, Shannon, for doing this and making this presentation available to people. And thank you everyone who tuned in tonight and took the time to listen. And we need as many helpers as we can get, because there are a lot of people out there who need help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Vail. I put a link to her website, dramyvail.com. You can also follow her on Facebook and know that she's right here. And again, if anything came up for you today, if there was anything that was emotional, or you just kind of recognize that there's some stuff to work on, now is a great time. Feel free to reach out to any of the phone numbers or the Tahoe Forest website. The hospital website has a directory of finding therapists that are in the area. It's always a great idea to connect with someone for yourself, for your family. All right, that's all we have, folks. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.